Hello, everyone. Welcome to All About Ibogaine, a Thursday podcast hosted by me and Awake.net, where we're talking to people who have a lot of experience with working with Ibogaine uh, during the last decades, where it has been a Schedule One substance in the United States, and so people who wanted to serve Ibogaine as a medicine to people who are trying to interrupt deadly addictions, TBI, psychospiritual things have resorted to medical tourism and gone to Mexico or other parts of the world where it is either um, unregulated or decriminalized or legal. Very few places like that. And there's a handful of people who have worked with this medicine for a long time and have learned how to do it correctly, how to navigate the ins and outs of what is really a really powerful medicine. So, for those of you who don't know what ibogaine is an extract that comes from two different plants, um, Tabernathi iboga and Wuakanga, and Ibogaine HCl can interrupt deadly addictions in oftentimes in a single treatment. It's a clinical treatment and it's a week-long procedure. And oh, I'm really happy to introduce to you today Tom Leonard of Anselmo Ibogaine. Hi, Tom, um, who is going to talk to us about how he works with Ibogaine. And we're just going to have a conversation about the subject. Thank you so much for showing up at such short notice, Tom, and I really look forward to our conversation.
Likewise, no problem.
Okay, so what I'd like to ask you to, so Tom is the founder of Anselmo Ibogaine in Rosarito, and what I'd like to ask you to share with us, Tom, is your origin story of how Ibogaine came into your life, and how you worked with it, and how it has evolved into you running a
Yeah,
clinic.
absolutely. My entrance into Ibogaine was I was a heroin addict. From a very young age. I don't know how much my backstory you want me to go into, so I'll cliff note it, but basically graduated at 16, already addicted to heroin. Instead of going to college, I ended up homeless, living in subway tunnels and shit. Excuse my language. Um, Now, I had gotten clean without Ibogaine the first time. Spent most of my 20s clean, and it was my late 20s. Um, well, let me rewind a little bit. During that period of time when I was clean, I saw Howard Lotsoff debating Bill O'Reilly on TV. Just randomly caught it. My grandfather had it on, and you know, him and I both were like, where was this shit, 3 years ago when he needed it. So, fast forward to my relapse, and I, I still tried the other ways, still went to detox countless times. You know, I've the only times I've really done 12 steps is when I was court ordered, or, I've done it after Ibogaine as well, voluntarily. But, it's the 12 steps are fine to keep you sober. They don't get you sober, Sitting in that room isn't going to get rid of your withdrawals. So,
Can I ask you a question about your relapse? Like you said,
yeah,
you relapsed after 10 years. Was there like an inciting
it was
incident?
7 years, but
7
yeah.
years? Was there an inciting incident, something that happened that made you relapse?
Not at all. My life was perfect. Had a great job, company car, salary. I was engaged. I had had that job for like 4 years. I was an exterminator, and I'm from Chicago, so my route was the West Side, which I was already used to. And for 4 years, I, you know, pulled up to places I used to buy dope from, and, took care of rats and roaches and mice, and, you know, um, countless times. I mean, it was almost a daily occurrence where, they'd see me in, rocks blows. They call them heroin blow in Chicago, but I would turn it away. And the this one day, this guy walks up to my window, and I didn't even bother rolling it down. I was doing paperwork. I was like, "Nah, I'm good." And as he's walking away, I still don't know why. My hand went, rolled down the window, and I was like, "Hey, I got 20," and thought it was just going to be that weekend. And we all know how that story goes. So, um, no, nothing profound happened in my life. No trauma. I wasn't going through any relationship issues. If anything, I was excited for the future.
Wow,
So.
that's amazing. Yeah, yeah. So then you relapsed, and how long had you relapsed before what happened? I'm sorry, I just interrupted, but I was curious about that.
No,
Continue.
so when I relapsed, um, it obviously I ended up losing my job, my relationship. Sorry, my voice is a little hoarse. I'm like literally just woke up an hour ago. But the normal addiction things, my life fell apart. But then it, oddly enough, I just kind of lucked into this position where, through being an exterminator, I mean, you literally go into everybody's house in Chicago. You meet everybody. So, um, I had a lot of different connections that I leaned on, and I kind of just stumbled into, I mean, I hesitate to even call it a job. I mean, they gave me a salaried position, so I could sell drugs on the floor, basically. But I got a job as a research analyst at the SIBO, and my only purpose was to go, figure out who needed what kind of pills, go out, get them, bring them back, and give them to the people. And I made enough money to support a raging heroin habit. And, I was still going out to eat, and, my bills were paid. Um, and that is what made me, I was so far from the bottom that I knew, the heroin that I knew was, sleeping in a subway tunnel, and, you know, risking going to jail for a couple weeks just to make a few bucks. And um, I was not prepared to lose one of the links in my chain and suddenly be back, to that was too far of a fall for me to even fathom. So I decided, I'm gonna do something about this. And Ibogaine was already in my conscience from the Howard interview. And then I had, just randomly picked up a Village Voice while I was riding the subway one day, and read an article about Dimitri, who, oddly enough, ended up becoming a close friend of mine, and uh, one of my one of my best teachers. But he he wasn't, he had just gone through his DEA thing. He wasn't doing treatments anymore. And, I started, I tried connecting with another provider that was going to come to Chicago, that fell through. And so then, I started looking at the Mexican route, and um, it took me a while to save up the money, even though, I mean, I you know, I was making money but I was burning it as fast as I made it. So, it took a few years to get the money together. And once I was finally there, the I had picked out a particular clinic, and I was going to go there because they were, they sounded the easiest, and they made it sound like it was the least painful thing. And, I'd be in and out of there in 5 days. And, it was back then it was like $4,000 or something like that. And, actually, no, it was 3,500 was what I was going to pay from them. But then I during this whole time, like my family and I weren't close. We didn't have like much of a relationship outside of, them just hoping that I'd, you know, find my way back sometime. Even when I was sober, we didn't have much of a relationship because, being sober isn't the end all of this game. Stopping the drug use is, people think that's all they need to do is I just need to stop using drugs. But you remove the drugs and, you're still the same person, then, so I mean, honestly, some people are easier to deal with on drugs. Like, if you're not going to do the work and fix the things that are going on inside you and causing these things to happen, then, you
Right.
know, I mean, I'm not telling people to stay on drugs, but I mean,
Well,
you
but
know,
if you think of the drugs as a as something that you use to manage uncomfortable feelings, and then you take the drugs away, the uncomfortable feelings are going to surface, and you have to
yeah,
deal with it,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. And that's a luxury that the families don't have, and it truly is a family disease. Even though I was estranged from my family, it still, put my mom through incredible stress. My father, I'm sure too. Um, my sister and I didn't have she disowned me when we were like 13. And, we didn't have a relationship really until I was in my 30s. Um, and I mean, we get along great now. I love her to death. You
Yeah.
know, we,
So
we
you had to go through a journey though of something of
Yeah,
reconciliation.
absolutely. I mean, getting to the Ibogaine wasn't easy, and then where I was leaving off was I was getting ready to pick this clinic. I'm not going to name them, but and the guy's a decent provider, but the 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 quickness of it is what appealed to me. And I was thinking, oh, I'll get right back to Chicago and get back to selling pills on the floor and just keep all the money. And my mom had, I told her I was going to do this, and she started like looking into some places, and I was already set to go. I had picked a date. I just hadn't, I was bringing cash, so I hadn't made any type of payment. And the my mom was like, just call this place, and it was Ibogaine University. And just the name of it, I was like, I'm not calling this place. It's the dumbest name I've ever heard. But I called, and I talked to a guy named Tyson, and next thing I know, I'm signing up for 30 days and, spending, almost $13,000. And um, it was, I couldn't believe I was doing it. Like I had never been away from Chicago for that long. You know, that alone was scary. And I mean, luckily back then it was heroin, so they were able to work like this, where the first week you get there and it was Ibogaine right away, and second week 5-MeO, third week fasting, nutrition, fourth week 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, and then you go home. So that's the treatment I went through. And so how I actually ended up in the Ibogaine business is, uh, so while I was on the Ibogaine, I realized I can't go back to Chicago. Like I don't have any close calls left in me. I've literally lost count of how many times I've overdosed and woken up in an ambulance or a hospital. I've been shot. I've been stabbed. I've been in multiple car wrecks that should have killed me. Um, and all were, if not directly, in some way, if I hadn't been doing drugs, I would have not been in the places and, situations that these things happen. So I made the decision early on that, I'm not going back to Chicago, although I did have to go back for a court date. So I actually left treatment, flew back for an overnight, um, went to court, and then packed up a backpack and a little carry-on bag. And, I left my apartment door open with the sign for people to just take what they wanted out of there. That wasn't coming back. Gave my truck away. Literally just walked away with a backpack and some clothes, and that became the entirety of my existence. When I finished my treatment, ended up going to stay with a buddy in Arizona, got a job at an auto body shop, and then with a roofing company doing estimates. And um, it was better than the situation I was in, but it wasn't a great situation. I knew that he partied, but I didn't realize, at that time he had a pretty sizable cocaine problem. And so um, fast forward 3 months, and I get a call, and it's Tyson. And so I should probably mention a little caveat. There was, while I was there, Tyson brought in a partner, and his name was Scott Ankeny. And he was never a very popular guy in the Ibogaine world. And but it was because he was very much an AA altruist, and like um but when I got to the clinic, like people that had just done Ibogaine were like hanging out in the living room, like while people are snorting pills, and like, they were actually giving syringes for people to shoot their Dilaudids. And like, I mean, I'm all for harm reduction, but like if you're going to get clean, you can do without putting a needle in your arm. And so I didn't want nothing to do with any of that. I really, I can't remember the name of one person, Christian. I stayed buddies with a guy named Christian. Other than that, I can't remember the names of the people I went through treatment with.
Hmm.
And I gravitated towards Scott. Tyson left. I didn't know it at the time, but he left to go to rehab while I was there. And so Scott, he comes in, he's like, tomorrow at 9 a.m., this place is going to be a completely different place, blah, blah, blah. And everybody hated him. But, to me, that was what I was looking for. I was looking for an environment where I wasn't going to be, I felt like I was in a trap house that was, serving IBM in the back. And that changed very quickly. And, so, anyways, after I got discharged from there and left, and he's also the guy that brought in the ayahuasca. Like we were one of the first, well, we were the first group to do the ayahuasca, uh, and the 30-day program. Like that was all like things that he came up with. Um, so 3 months after, they call me up. I'm in Arizona. I'm working at this auto body shop, and it's Labor Day weekend is coming up at the end of the week. And I didn't know this at the time, but come to find out, this was all over a $50 bet between the two of them on whether or not I was clean. Tyson was betting that I was back in Chicago and, doing what I did. And, Scott actually bet on me being clean. And so um, they invite, that they talked to me on the phone, and apparently, like, me being in Arizona and having a job wasn't enough. So they invited me to the AA South Bay Roundup. And, I went because it was going to be nice to see them, and because I had never been to California besides like, passing through on an Amtrak on my way to go to Mexico. So, um, I drove out there, spent the weekend out there. help Tyson out with some stuff. And then on the last day is when I finally, saw Scott. We met at a coffee shop, and he was telling me, why don't you come down for the week? We're gonna have an ayahuasca ceremony this week, and why don't you come down and sit? And I told him I appreciate it, but I have to be back at work tomorrow. Like I got to get back on the road. And he starts busting my balls over it. And he's like, come on, man. He's like, just a week. You scared a little ayahuasca, you scared you're gonna shit your pants and all this stuff. And, you know, I I was like, dude, like the only reason I'm where I'm at right now and have a job is because of you. Like why you're trying to persuade me to do something that would like sabotage my life. And so he was like, all right, he's like, if you wanted, we were going to offer you a job at the end of the week if things worked out. He's like, if you want to get, if you want to come down and work and you want to get away from the auto shop and get off the roofs in Arizona, you know, this is your opportunity. So say
It's like
less.
Ibogaine came and got you.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah. So I was like, I'll be there. I was like, I still have to go back to Arizona because I got to get my bags. I got to, tell my buddy and my boss I'm not going to be at work. And I felt bad 'cause I mean, he vouched for me, stuck his neck out. But the owner, I mean, he knows what I'm doing now. He knows I'm better off where I'm at. But he was a great guy too. I had a lot of just great people that didn't even know me in many of these instances that just fell into my life after I began. It was like, and that's why I tell all my patients, if you make the right choice, not the easy decision, but the right decision, do what you know is right, no matter how scary it is. Life, it may seem like it's slamming a door in your face, but it's going to open a window, just trust the process and, ultimately things will work out.
Right.
So,
You've talked
th-
about this moral compass idea, which I'd love to talk about a little bit later, what that
yeah,
means for you.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that was just my grandfather. You know, he, let's
Well,
put
let's
him
let's
in a little later in the story because
yeah, yeah.
has to do with the name change. So, um, when I went down there to work, it was still Ibogaine University, and at first I was like a professional patient, making sure everybody got to group, and I would lead the morning check-ins and do like a evening guided meditation. And other than that, like, I was basically just going through it was like I was just still there. And um, I had mentioned earlier Tyson was having some problems at that time. And he was the phone guy. And all of a sudden, not only did, Google make some changes, but he just wasn't answering the phone. And so, we went from, there always being anywhere from like 12 to 15 people at a time to like, two or three people. And, it was a 22 room facility with 30 beds. Like, it was getting to the point where, you know, it was about to close. Now, also during this time, I forgot to mention like a huge part of this. I got a phone call. Um, my grandfather, who, he lived a very modest life. I never thought of them as people that had money or anything. And I get a phone call saying, like, hey, that your grandfather left a trust, blah, blah, blah. Like, so my uncle, I had him be my executor because I didn't trust myself with the money. At first, I didn't think it was going to be much money. I thought it was going to be like, $4,000 or $5,000 or something. But it ended up, I mean, it wasn't a huge amount, but it was significantly more than that. And so I was able, to live off of that money. And, I knew they were, two payrolls behind with the staff. And, it was like, pay them, I'm good. I got this money, I'll get by. And, in hindsight, I sometimes wonder, because I found out about that money like while I was there. Um, Sometimes I wonder, how much that played a role in me getting the job. But to their credit, though, they never did ask me for money in the beginning. Um, but when we got to that point, and we were basically gonna be closing, and so Scott was like, he asked me to try the phones. It's at this point it can't get any worse. So I got on the phones and he's giving me all these like videos from like the from Jordan Belfort, Wolf of Wall Street guy, like how to sail, and like I never watched a single one of them. The the way I think I was so successful on the phones is I didn't act like a salesman. I didn't push people. I did my best to answer their questions. Never, never was pushy about things. I would encourage them to do research. And so after a while, we're back to being full and having a waiting list. And so
Nice.
we get to the point where they owe me a considerable amount of money. And I know I mean they have it, but like it would kill the company to give it to me. So um, I proposed to them, make me a partner, give me equity, and we'll just reset that meter at zero. And so that's how I ended up becoming part of it. And that was when we rebranded as Ibogaine Institute. And so Ibogaine Institute was Tyson, Scott, and myself. And then Scott left later on due to, just irreconcilable differences. He's still a good friend of mine, but just business wise, it didn't work out. And Tyson at that time, um, he was never on site. He was actually in a program up in Long Beach, working on some of his own issues. And when Scott left, he thought that he was going to come running back, and it was back to the free for all that it used to be. And not just myself, but the entire staff didn't want that. And so it became like this, for where Scott and Tyson are arguing, like, like, no, you need to get rid of him and come with me. No, you need to get rid of him and come with me. And the staff is just like, wherever you go is where we're going to go. And the
Do
thought
you
never even occurred to me to get rid of both of them. But, that was actually a suggestion of a therapist friend of mine. I had treated her sister. And so I reached out to her and talked to her, and she just kind of told me like, well, you already have the answer, you just don't see it. She's like, the staff is going where you go. So she's like, why, you know you feel like a child in the middle of a divorce and you don't like either of your parents, don't go with either of them, you're grown. And so that's what I did. And that's why well, that's not exactly why we changed the name to Anselmo. I bought Tyson out of his shares, with the money that I had left over that I got from my grandfather, and then also some of the money from the clinic. And he used that to go and start his dog rescue, which he was trying to do that. When I got there as a patient, there was more dogs than there were people, and like I'm talking dogs with mange, dogs that had just been bit by rattlesnakes and had like all these infections and wounds. Um, and I actually got a parasite infection from the dogs while I was there. It was
Yeah.
horrific. So that was one of the rules when he left, and like when I came into the picture, it was like no more dogs. We let him pick one to keep, and then that was it. We had Wally and no more dogs. And once Wally was gone, that was it. So we're doing medical treatment. It's a medical facility. Really don't need
Exactly.
a dog running around it, especially one that's pissing and shitting on the floor. Excuse my language.
So,
Um, so yeah, so I bought him out, and we were, I did all the transfer of the intellectual property, the website, all that stuff. And he unfortunately passed away unexpectedly. And we the URL, the GoDaddy account, was the one thing that never got transferred over. And even with his family's help, and we just couldn't get the password. And so it just got, and then GoDaddy was like, well, it's once it expires, you got to wait X amount of time, and then after nobody claims it, then we can sell it to you for $15,000. And it's like, you excuse me, like, you want to sell me my own website for what? So um, that's when I was like, you know what? It's a new start. It's a new beginning. Let's go with a new name. And I had all the employees brainstorming and all these different names with different meanings, and none of them sounded right, and none of them felt right. And although I liked the meanings behind some of them, they just didn't sound right. And I'm not saying Anselmo exactly rolls off the tongue, but it has a deeply personal meaning for me, and that is my grandfather. I was, you know, preface all this by saying my parents are wonderful, lovely people, and they have done as much change in their lives as I have, and I'm extremely proud of them. But, as a child, um, the household was volatile to say the least. I won't get into specifics, just out of respect for my family, but um, I spent most of my time with my grandparents, and on weekends we would go up north of the city to Niles, where my great grandma lived, and she was like she like walked straight off the boat, like fresh from Sicily. My grandfather was first generation, and and he's not my real grandfather. Um, he never had any children of his own, but he treated his grandkids like they were, his flesh and blood. And he was who I looked up to, who I spent all my time with. We'd go fishing, crawdad hunting, all the sorts of stuff. He'd always try to get me out into nature. And he worked in finance in the Hancock building, down in the Loop. But like, we would go out and go to forest preserves on the weekends. And, I mean, it's not like he was home all the time. I mean, you gotta think this is, he was still working age back then. And um, so the reason I chose him is, yeah, he was um, moral compass is a good term for it. My North Star, I guess. Um, but my all my values, my morals, like who I am as a person, how I think, uh, I attribute a lot of that to him. Um, he was the only male in my life that was sitting down and telling me, how things work, and that was really around. And not that my father didn't try,
role model.
but you know.
Yeah.
So, um, I'm trying to remember the phrase I used because it wasn't moral compass, but it was something else, and I've been having trouble remembering it ever since then because we picked that compass logo. But yeah, he was very much who molded me as a young man, and you know,
Yeah, yeah. So this idea that you're talking about, moral compass, and why I feel like, or whatever you call it, moral compass, North Star, finding the way, finding the right way in any situation in life. Well, a lot of from what I understand of addiction and I began in this journey, excuse me, a lot of the journey is is if you think of addiction as having gone the wrong way, in many ways you have to bring yourself back to the right way. And it's not just with one thing as in ending your addiction, it's really a whole lifestyle that has to change. And so um, that's what you're kind of sharing in your story here is how your lifestyle changed. And it's not doesn't happen overnight with the ibogaine treatment itself. You know,
no, not at all, not at all. As a matter of fact, the day after you take the Ibogaine, your first thought's going to be, I want to get high. It's just the truth of it. It's really the nor-Ibogaine that causes the interruption in the compulsory thought and behavior patterns. And so, it's, the day after Ibogaine, 2 days after Ibogaine, it's going to cross your mind. You're not going to act on it. I mean, unless you didn't really want to get clean in the first place. But by day 3, day 4, day 5, it's not even entering your conscious sphere anymore. And you're literally, it's like you're seeing, like you had an eye transplant or something, like you're seeing the world through this new set of lenses, or through a new set of eyes. And you know you not just, things aren't just visually enhanced. I mean, you've gone from a state of numbness to a state of not just feeling, but feeling at a heightened level. And that's honestly uncomfortable. um it's a lot for a lot of people to handle. And see, that's where a lot of the work comes in afterwards, and why it's so important to work with somebody, and to not just, go do Ibogaine and then just drop yourself right back into, where you came from and think that everything's going to be fine. Like, it's not. I mean, some people are able to squeak through like that, but they're already pretty functional in life. Um, if you're at a place where like you're, you know, you're about to lose your job, excuse me, hold on. Everybody tries to call it the most. Sorry about that. Um, so the I just lost my train of thought. I'm so
to go
sorry.
back
A phone
to go
call
back
came
to
through.
oh, do you need to go or something?
No, no, she just keeps calling, and I keep trying to hit the decline button, and every time I hit decline, it switches the screen over. So, but no, she can wait.
So to pick up the thread again, you were talking about Anselmo Ibogaine, and I think I would really love to hear from you what it has evolved into from that rabid dog-ridden place that you were describing that you got. Like, what is it today? Like, what has it evolved into?
Yeah. It's gone through a lot of stages. So when I was, first doing this, when we were Ibogaine Institute and in Zelmo Ibogaine, it, you know, we had, like I said, we had a very large facility, but even then, I had decided to throttle back. Like I was maxing it out at 12 clients a week. Um, you know, we were trying to fill every bed when it was Scott and Tyson and I, but it just gets too uncontrollable. And I've seen too many instances where, people that are about to, they're on the cusp of their 30 days clean and or sober, however you want to call it. Some people get offended by clean. I don't. Kind of hard to offend. Um, so I've seen too many situations where you get one bad apple that comes in who, decides to sneak a jab of blows up his ass or, gets something in somehow. And, you're thinking you're about to send home like, 8 or 10 people to their happy families. And, they have this whole new great life ahead of them. And you go to wake everyone up in the morning and there's fucking, needles on the floor. And,
Yeah.
it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens enough. And so, the choices were, to hire more staff and raise prices and, keep running at a breakneck speed or to just slow it down, reduce the size, keep the staff we had, and, just keep more of a container on it.
Right.
And we still did that 30-day program for up until about 2018, 2019, 2019 actually. Um, and we had to stop doing it because the drug supply changed so much. Um, I haven't seen someone come in and test just for heroin without fentanyl in years.
Right.
Um, people think they're not doing fentanyl, but they are.
Right. So that changed
And
the whole dynamics. It just changed.
yes, yeah, because now there's so much work that has to be done up front, where it used to be you showed up on Monday, we got your labs and EKG done, and then by Wednesday you're in your Ibogaine treatment. We're only going through a handful of stabilization meds per client, and now we're going through, hundreds per client. Um, it's a very different dynamic, and it's causing us to have to front load all this work where we're, us personally, we do infusion therapies, we do um, different type methods of detox to pull these things out faster. Because I mean, fentanyl, if somebody's smoking fentanyl and you just let it casually come out of their system without trying to, use any antioxidants or anything to speed up the process, you'll be waiting 18 days to see a clean test.
Wow.
And, the reality is, it's trust but verify. People might say, well, I haven't done it in 10 days. And if they haven't done it in 10 days, then they probably are, you know, they're probably not going to die if you give them the Ibogaine, but there's enough people out there that will lie to your face and are convincing to where you just can't, you need to see a negative result. It's just the way, it's not
You have to be
safe
strict about it
to
because of
exactly,
right.
exactly. Even
So
even if you feel in your gut that they're probably telling the truth, I can't tell you how many times I thought I've been being told the truth just to find out that, it was all bullshit. So
it seems to come with the territory a little bit.
yeah, oh, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. So so now you do continuous monitoring and you have a doctor, and can you talk a little bit
Oh,
about how you set it up for safety? What it really helps, I
yeah.
think, people, whether they come to your clinic or not, to understand what safety parameters are for a good Ibogaine clinic, and yeah, can you share?
Yeah, so medical oversight for sure, especially, I mean, if you're looking to do an iboga ceremony or something, that's a different ball game. But if you're looking to detox to get off drugs, or you're looking to do a flood dose, for some other reason, whether it's PTSD or TBI or whatever. But when we're talking flood doses where everything is formulated carefully, by body weight, body mass, your labs, enzyme levels. There's so much that goes into the formulation of it, and there's no room for error. That's why we don't use TA, we don't use bark, we will only use uh, HCl and a particular HCl, and it's benchmarked at a 96% purity, but it usually comes back as a 98.2 to a 98.6.
Wow.
And so, those extra milligrams matter when you're talking about macro dosing at that level. It's and on top of that, we're dealing with a population that is essentially immunocompromised. I mean, if you're putting drugs into your body every day, your system's constantly fighting itself, and they're not eating well. I mean, 9 out of 10 of these guys that come through are anemic. The fatty livers, lots of stuff that are going on with them, and it's absolutely necessary to have medical oversight. Our treatment team consists of an MD, paramedics, and a nurse, and myself. And I don't really consider myself part of the treatment team. I am a certified healthcare provider through the Red Cross in the United States and Mexico, but um, you know, I'm the guy that answers the phone and you know makes the background decisions.
You're being modest. You're being modest, I must say, because I've seen you at work and you know a lot. And of course, it's not degreed that you know a lot, like you didn't get a degree, but you learned by doing and having to deal with situations, as did many people who have been in this clinical Mexican or overseas clinical environment, just because of the legal and political situations that surround it. So I just want to say, I think you know a lot, and I really have appreciated how you approach working with people. So just so people know, the reason I know that is because I watched Tom work with one of our feed candidates and saw him, and so I think that actually brings me to the question I have about how you show up for it. What does showing up? What is a good candidate for Ibogaine? How should you show up for it to be maximally effective for you?
um, honest. Don't honest with yourself and honest with us. It's I just had a couple not too long ago, and we normally don't take couples for exactly this reason. I was doing it as a favor to another provider. It was one of his friends, and unfortunately, his friend's son didn't really want to get clean, but the girlfriend did. And I put up with so much from them. Literally, I mean, they fell asleep with bags of meth and pipes in their hands, and we took them out of their hands and didn't say anything. And they were accusing each other. They each thought the other one stole it, and but that happened 4 times where we confiscated things. The guy actually threw a punch at me twice. Um, so you know, I'm all about second chances, third chances, so long as I think that somebody really wants it. But it was time for him to go. He had already been there at this point for 8 days, and he's still going through the drugs that he couldn't bother to turn in and flush down the toilet. So um, unfortunately, she left with him. They came together, left together, but she decided she wanted to, get clean, whether he wanted to or not. And she called me up and she's like, I'm not leaving Mexico until I do Ibogaine. At first I was like, well, good luck with that. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. And but she's telling me, we paid you and blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, and you also signed the paperwork that, you know exactly what you signed. You violated 18 of the 20 community guidelines countless times. Like, there's really no argument here. But it was one of the things she said to me was that she was like, I don't care, I'm not gonna say the guy's name, but I don't care what so and so does, he can go back and use. I'm not, like, if that means that we have to break up after 14 years, then we're broken up. And he's in the background screaming, telling her to hang up the phone. So um
Hmm.
uh I went and treated her off site at a hotel, and she went home to her family, and she's still clean to this day. And
So
um,
that's intention there for you, right? I mean, you heard the intention when she said that she was willing to give
yeah,
up everything.
yeah,
And
and that was kind of what I was getting to is like, there are some people that show up a hot mess, and from an outside appearance, my nurses a lot of times are like, why are they here? Like, why are they even here if they're just going to be high? And it's the first day, it's the second day, like, just give them a day, because I know personally myself, when I went to go do Ibogaine, I went with, 2 jabs of dope, and I also took an Amtrak. I needed to stay well the whole time, but my goal was to make sure I had some in case, you know, I I was almost sure that I was going to get robbed as soon as I got to Mexico. I was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. Going to Mexico with fucking $12,500, and you know, never seen this person. Never, I talked to him on the phone a couple times. But I personally, I ran out. Like, the before I got to the border, and I had never crossed the border. I didn't know what it was like, and I was terrified of going to a Mexican prison. But I did have the intention of showing up with drugs, and I had every full intention of getting clean. So I keep that in mind when people are having a rough start on, day one, day two. Um, I'll
though,
have a come to Jesus talk with them. I mean, not, we're not we don't push religion here. I'm not really talking about Jesus, but
no,
you know
no, I
what I
get
mean. Um, but I keep that in mind. Like, you can't judge the person that shows up. You got to give them a couple days, and sometimes that means putting up with some bad behavior. But if we're on day 4, 5, 6, 7 and dealing with those problems, that's when it's time to start thinking about, maybe this isn't the right time or the right fit.
Mm.
So.
So before they actually came to the clinic, you've done a bunch of pre-screening to determine that they're a good candidate for Ibogaine.
Yes, and I dropped the ball on that one because he missed 6 phone appointments with me, but the father kept answering and saying, "Oh yeah, he's right here, but they're packing their stuff, and you can hear everything you're saying." But I never heard the kid's voice, so I don't know if he was actually there or not. Um, and that was a huge red flag to me. The first time I actually heard his voice, he was in a van driving, down the West Coast on his way here. And his only concerns are you going to separate me from my girlfriend? It's like, no, I'm not going to separate you from her, but you guys are going to have separate bedrooms. It's going to be like you guys are roommates, not, you're not going to be sleeping in the same bed. Um, and that was his only concern. And never slept in his bed a single time, by the way.
What should the concern be? What would you say the concern should be? Like, really?
So The red flags are people that aren't willing to do any of the work up front, that are looking for just a quick fix. Like, the unfortunate part is they're going to respond really well to the yeah, I'm not going to say names, but we all know, the type of people I'm talking about. And they promise them the world, that they say yes to everything. That, by the way, is a huge red flag. If you're talking to a clinic and they say yes to all these special requests, huge red flag. Um, but if they're not willing to, work with a coach, you know, it, like even when it's included as part of the program and they're still refusing to talk, then what if they're being that difficult at that juncture, chances are they're not going to be successful afterwards. That hard-headedness is, it's something to be wary of.
Not wanting to be transparent or honest is really what that sounds like it is behind it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what it boils down to is, they don't want to let go of whatever narrative they've been holding on to. And that's also one of my, like, if people take any lesson from me, like, let it be this, um, you have to let go of all the lies and false narratives and all the things that you did while you were using. And, when you get home and somebody brings something up and, like, oh, remember that time that, this happened to you? And, if it was a lie, just come out and say it. Be like, you know what? I was a different person then, like, if if you don't want to explain it, don't say, we can talk about it some other time, but, that's not how it really happened. Or, you know,
So
it,
it's
it
a huge unraveling of yourself, like
Yeah, oh,
unraveling yourself.
absolutely. You
Very
you you need to get back to your authentic self, and authentic people don't lie. They don't put up a false narrative. And even though, people think like, oh, well, I'm not telling a new lie, but you really kind of are, because you have to keep lying to cover that lie, and it just keeps you in that loop. And, you're, especially after Ibogaine and your brain is getting its neuroplasticity restored, you have all these neural networks that were atrophied that are now able to carry an electrical charge, and you're still going to that same loop of the lies. And so you're retraining your brain to do the same default that it arrived in. So it's, if you can't commit to it's not like you have to come clean about everything, but you have to at least commit to not continuing to lie and to uphold those narratives. How you choose to dispense with them is gonna depend on the situation. Some will be easy to laugh at and be like, yeah, I was on drugs, man, what do you expect? Or, but some are gonna hurt people, and it's just the way it is. But that is also how those same people are ever going to believe that you're actually changed and you're a different person,
Right.
because nine times out of ten, probably more than that, the people already know it's a lie. You know,
Right, exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, people can see through it and doesn't mean that someone's going to tell you, but just
exactly. Yeah, they're never going to tell you.
yeah,
And when they see that you're still on that bullshit, then
then they're not
they're
going to believe in you, and then but it also you can't believe in yourself. So I think, having talked to several people who applied for our program, and I see what this addiction thing is. A lot of times, you're lying to yourself, and it's this big self-deception, and the self-deception becomes your self-sabotage. Because, like you said, you got to get through that, to be able to move on. And you kind of have to take responsibility for not just the addiction interruption. You got to take responsibility for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And after a while you realize you have to change your whole life. And this is true whether it's addiction or anything of just self-development,
Yeah.
you
Absolutely. It's not just addiction. It's like you said, it's just, I mean, it's emotional intelligence, really. It's what it boils down to. You know,
right. And it
it's
can
the
become
golden
very
rule.
pleasurable once you accept it. It can become pleasurable to do to evolve yourself and change and watch your life change as you
Yeah,
change.
yeah. I've gotten great pleasure in bursting some of those bubbles for my family.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, I wanted to open it up to questions. Does anybody have any questions? But I just want to say that the chat box is on my end all black and I can't see the text and I couldn't figure out how to change the chat box to white. So if you have a question, just speak up about it or raise your hand in the emojis.
Yeah. So while we're waiting, to continue about what the treatment process looks like. We do have an MD. Um, the but the paramedics are key. If I were personally going into a treatment and I could only have two people in the room, I would call two paramedics. If you get in a car accident, you have a heart attack while you're walking down the street, it's not a doctor that pulls up. Doctors deal with people that have been stabilized. And, I mean, I'm not putting any doctors down here that, they went to school, you know, they cut their teeth and earned everything they have. But paramedics, it's their muscle memory to respond to trauma. I mean, it's during the day they're going, especially down here, they're, dealing with massive trauma on a daily basis. And so something, is I don't want to say benign because it's not, but like premature ventricular contractions are a cakewalk for them. Like they're just slip a little medication in the IV line and normally it stabilizes and patient doesn't even know that there was any complication. Um,
What about
but
cardiac arrest? Like if that happens, because that has been touted as a danger. Uh, how do you deal with the QT interval slowing down with the HCL, and how do you deal with that in general?
well, I mean, so I guess it depends on what you mean by deal with it. I mean, we screen for it.
Have you
Um,
had any instances like that where something serious happened and you had to intervene?
we, I've had two adverse events that were easily reversed with medication.
Nice.
One actually even happened while there was a film crew there. Um, and the film crew, the doctor from the U.S. that was visiting to watch everything, none of them even knew that we were going through like a highly critical, dangerous moment. Um, Nobody was any the wiser, and casually just put the medication in the IV, and luckily it took care of it. But um, I've spent so much money on ambulances, just to have them on standby, and thank God, we do have a protocol for if there is a adverse cardiac event that we take them to a hospital in San Diego in Chula Vista. So we go in by ambulance, and our paramedic gets into the American ambulance with them, goes to the hospital, and they're monitored further there. Now, I've only had to do that once, and that was last year. And I never should have allowed that guy into treatment.
Mm.
He was another one that I kicked out, and his family was so desperate. I mean, I had been letting them know what was going on. He had found a way to get drugs through a local person that he met while being, we took him out to get labs and EKG and stopped for lunch, and he, you know, met someone and got a phone number, and that stuff happens. You can't be watching everything all the time, but I was keeping his father and his mother informed of everything, and they had actually, sorry, this woman, they had actually, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
So, um, they had actually at one point given me, because he had overdosed here. We had to Narcan him. And that's when I was like, this isn't going to work. He's got to go. And, the family's trying to think of anything they can to make it work. And like when I had told them that he had overdosed, they asked me to DNR. Don't give him Narcan, to just let him go. And I explained that that's not an option in Mexico. By law in Mexico, you have to do everything within your power to save someone's life. So it's
Oh.
not an option to not resuscitate. And so long story short, the father was like, "Well, what if I fly down there and I'll get an Airbnb and you give me the medications, and if he tests clean at the end of the week for the fentanyl, then will you let him back in to treat him?" And I agreed to it. After the father already arrived, I found out from his daughter that he's also an alcoholic and an opioid addict, which I would not have agreed to all this had I known that up front. Um, and so, the I one of the days I was going out to run to the OXXO down the street, and I catch him walking back in the building, and he's got a little bag with, they only use bags for two things in stores down here, and it's medication or booze. And I know the stores around here. I know which bags come from which stores. And, he had a pint bottle of booze that he was bringing back. This is the father. And so, I said something to him about it, but he was like, denying that anything's going on with the son and everything's going to be fine. So, anyways, he began having premature ventricular contractions, and they were getting closer and closer. In the beginning, they were happening, once, every 5 minutes or so, and it was noticeably picking up pace. And so it got to a point where we had to make a judgment call, like, it's 50-50 if it's going to degrade further into a possibly fatal arrhythmia. And so we either can send him to the hospital now where they can put a temporary internal pacemaker in, or, you know, risk it and hope that he comes out okay, or face the possibility of having him hooked up to a defibrillator for 36 hours and randomly getting shocked. And, obviously we're not going to choose that. So, while he was sent him to the hospital, and he got back before my paramedic. And while they were gone, we were cleaning out the room there. I opened up his water bottle. It was gin and squirt, and our bad for not checking the water bottle. Um, but uh, anyways, though, this guy's father brings him back, And so we're like, our paramedic isn't even back yet. What are you guys doing here? And he's like, oh no, he's fine. They said it was nothing and to just go home. And I'm like, all right, where's the discharge papers? And he's like, oh, they didn't give us discharge papers. And it's like, okay, then you left against medical advice. And he's like, are you going to take my son back or not? And I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to put him right back in the ambulance and send him back to the hospital. And so, there was a little bit of an argument, and he ended up just taking his son and back to his Airbnb. And that wasn't the end of it, but it was the end of it for that night. Um, you know, it was the one time we had to send somebody to the hospital, and it was completely preventable. And it was 100% on me. And my I have a soft spot for the families. No, I
I, yeah, I was just going to say that the family dynamic seems to be very important. And
Yeah,
oftentimes, family members are enablers in bigger ways than people realize, right? As you go into treatment. So how do you deal with that? I mean, the family members have to change as much as like you said about your own family that your parents had to change and
yeah,
went through.
yeah.
So
And they did all that change outside of me and what I was doing. I mean, they did that because, my mom had another baby, 17 years after me. So they they didn't want to do a redo of me, so they they changed some things around. But no, I mean the families should change. Everybody should change. We should constantly evolve. But
in the best
it's
way.
real. It's hard to tell with the families. Some of them they portray themselves as a very healthy nuclear family, and they're hiding as many secrets or more as the patient is. And sometimes people you think, like, oh, like, judging a book by its cover, like, oh, this guy's probably bad news, and they end up being, one of the most wonderful people you've ever met. So, but the family dynamic, it's important, but one of the ways to change the family dynamic is to choose not to interact with your family. And that's what a lot of people, unfortunately, need to do. It's,
Yeah, Jesse says some people's families will
yeah,
downfall every time. They sabotage because they will not adjust their own dynamic. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
But
sometimes to find yourself, you have to leave. I think, I left India when I was 23 because my family's projection of who I was like laid over me, like I couldn't get rid of it. I had to
yeah,
leave to find myself. And sometimes you have to do that. And it doesn't mean you're never going to connect with your family again, but maybe for a
yeah,
while.
it's just time to leave the nest.
Yeah.
And, that's basically what I was getting at is, I mean, you're old enough to be, out there doing the things you're doing on drugs and all that. You're old enough to take responsibility for yourself and not have to lean on your family to get better too. I mean, when you're grown, they're not, and you're not entitled to anything from them. I mean, you should be, at least guaranteed some unconditional love, but not everybody is that lucky. And so that the family dynamic, it's different for everyone because the families are so different. But um, back to red flags. Another red flag is when the family does all the phone calls and you cannot get the client on the phone. I tend to not take those people. If you can't take 10 minutes out of your busy schedule of nodding off to talk to me and see what you're about to get into,
Mhm.
it tells me that. either you're not doing any research at all because you don't care, or you already think you know everything. And either way, it's not
or
a
or
ideal personality type to deal with.
or you're high all the time, or you're have some other sickness or some other thing that's going to complicate the issue. And if you can't actually come to the phone and talk, you're not going to have the strength to go through the ibogaine, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I get it. I hate my phone. It's my worst enemy, but that's because I'm on it so damn much. But it's I missed my dad's birthday last week. Um, I was just so caught up in the treatment, I didn't realize it till the next day, and then I called him a week early for Father's Day. You know, it's but he was fine with it. He understands why. It's not like I was like out running the streets or something. I mean, he knows I'm eyeballs deep in work, and
All right. People,
he's
yeah, people ask about why ibogaine treatments cost so much. There's these conversations going on. I don't think people understand what it takes, how much it takes, how full on it is.
yeah. I mean,
Or
I'm literally on 24/7. I'm getting calls from literally all over the world, from all different time zones at all times of day. I've learned to sleep in 2-hour shifts. Um, it's thankfully I have a little bit of help on the phones now, but um, that's a hard position to fill, by the way, too. The person who's answering the phone is making the first impression for your company. And so, you don't want some guy that's coming off as a sleazy used car salesman to be the the projection you're putting out there. So
right.
that's why I've
That's
always just
no.
kind of handled it myself.
Do you still handle it yourself, pretty much?
Uh, Yes and no. I do have some help from a very esteemed colleague of ours, but
Yeah.
he's got night shifts, so he gets the easy shift. Um, but it definitely helps. He's also got access to the back end of the website, so he can respond to some of the email requests for calls and all that stuff too. So it definitely lightens my load for sure.
Yeah.
So
Well, is there anything else you want to share, Tom?
yeah, I mean, you know, you you got to be honest with yourself before you do this. You got to understand that, I mean, it sounds cliche, but you are the medicine. The Ibogaine's a tool. All the healing that's going to happen, the Ibogaine precipitates it. It's coming from inside you. And if you're not in a place where you're ready to take that on and do that kind of work, don't don't waste your money. Don't waste your time. Don't waste the provider's time. I mean, there's plenty of people out there that are willing to take your money and get you in and get you out, and they could care less on whether you had a good experience or not. And um, but that's not how anybody should be experiencing this medicine. And especially if you're trying to do a detox, or you have some sort of you know deeply transformational process that you're about to go through, and it's not just some like psycho spiritual exploration. um you really need to be be in it with both feet in the box. It's
Well, it seems to me like it's deeply transformational, whether it's psychospiritual or anything else. The medicine itself.
Yeah, it's a forced white light experience. That's how I explain it to a lot of the families. I mean, even people, agnostic, atheists, people that that outright reject religion, like I used to be a militant atheist. Um, it was thanks to spending 5 years in Catholic school, but um, it was entheogens that specifically 5-MeO. I tried that before I ever got to the Ibogaine. But it um I mean I literally it was my experience was like like if somebody decided to animate the Book of the Dead, like how I would see it in my mind's eye. And
Oh,
it it was just like the first thing my first thought, my first words were like, like there's something out there, like there's more than this, we don't just die. And I've had plenty of near-death experiences, and some of them, I was able to see myself from outside of my body and was getting farther, and there was the light. But some of them, there was just nothing, and that was, what was helping convince me that there's just nothing after death. But thinking back on those, like maybe there was nothing because like I was unconscious and mangled up in a car, or bleeding out on a sidewalk, or whatever the case may be. But it took the entheogens to really make me realize that, like, yeah, and I'm not a follower of any of the Abrahamic religions. I'm a student of all of them, but I don't ascribe to anyone. But I would consider myself a spiritual person, and I think that anyone who's dealing with addiction is, and not just addiction, but eating disorders, you know, all sorts of mental. I hate using the word disease and disorder for mental conditions, but anyone deal with mental unwellness, yeah, it's
I always call it acquired conditioning, what you're saying. Mental, acquired conditioning, you can get rid of it,
yeah, exactly.
right?
And so, yeah, if you're not willing to shed those pieces of you, if you're not willing to give yourself over, and oh, back to us, the with the addiction, you're trying to fill a hole, and some people think that that hole is because they went through a breakup or they lost a job. That may be the surface level of it, but when you start peeling the onion back, it's a spiritual malady.
Absolutely.
You're trying to fill a God-sized hole, and
Yeah.
nothing will ever fill that hole. So
Except a direct experience that helps you to understand that.
yeah, and that's what. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place.
No.
Um, so what I was saying about the forced white light experience, that's kind of how I explain, when people's families are curious, like why, like how does this work? Like why should I believe that it's going to change my son who's been to rehab 20 times and jagged it off every time? And it's like, well, usually, I'll ask them, and usually the person is not a religious or spiritual person, or they were, and they no longer are. They're disillusioned, which everybody on drugs gets disillusioned. It's par for the course, but um, it's what causes many people to get clean outside of Ibogaine is having a spiritual experience, or a quote unquote white light experience, whether it's just a moment of clarity that strikes you in the middle of a traumatic event, or whether it's a stranger on the street that just says the right words at the right time and just spark something in you. But, the catalyst for change is almost always some sort, it's on a spiritual level.
It's
And
energetic and spiritual, I would say, right? It's energy. It's kind of
yeah,
energetic.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, everything's energy, energy can never not be, it can change forms and information's energy, the everything on our computer screen is energy. Everything in our brain matter is energy. But um, yeah, the it it if you're not willing to match your energy with, the I don't want to say with the provider, but like with if with the situation, like you can't come in and just be some curmudgeon that's like, no, fuck everything, fuck God, fuck, like you still may have a breakthrough experience with the Ibogaine and feel a different type of way afterwards, but that's real shaky ground to be walking in on. And I'm not saying people need to accept, the Lord into their life or anything like that. Like far from it.
Well,
Um,
sometimes it's just that you feel a different sense of self-love, like Apollo said here, self-love, pure,
yeah,
just feeling self-love is a step in the right direction and opens you up. It's not necessarily a religious experience, but in a way it is a religious
yeah,
experience
yeah.
if you redefine what
It's
that is.
when people ask me to sum up like why ibogaine worked for me personally, and like to cliff note it in the shortest way possible, it's that I was able to say I love myself and say it with a straight face and mean it and not feel silly or feel less or feel like I was being inauthentic. I was truly able to love myself. And,
So that's
you
where that
know,
hole gets filled up that you're talking about,
yes, yeah,
right?
yeah. It, back to what I was saying, it all comes from inside you.
Right. So another comment from Jesse. I'm saying this for the recording out loud. There is
Yeah,
more to reality than your own experience. It's about not being the center of the universe, which many of us are in active addiction. So important and doesn't require religion itself, but for sure humility and spirituality. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
And I hope I was being clear about the fact that I'm not pushing any religion. I don't
Yeah,
ascribe to any religion. I identify as spiritual. Um, you
it's
know,
an important distinction, but really at the heart of all these different religions, it's the same truth that you come to if you did go deep enough into any one religion and peeled away those layers, of institutions and everything. That in the end, it's the same thing. Um, yeah,
yeah, yeah. Same play, different cast.
exactly. Um, well, this has been a great conversation. I'm really glad you brought it around to the spiritual experience or the like, what is it about Ibogaine that actually makes the difference? And it brings me around to this conversation about isolating the molecule and removing the altered state experience. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, I do. So Ibogaine, the reason why it works is because it works on so many different levels. It's not just the rewiring, I mean, maybe for a TBI patient, that would be, the most ideal route to go. You're just looking for structural repair at that point. But when we're talking about, depression, anxiety, addiction, all of these, maladies, that are deeply personal, um, it's it, it's it works not just by restoring the neuroplasticity and opening up the atrophied neural networks, but it works by, you have this conversation with yourself that, I mean, human beings have this self-defense mechanism. We all have it, and it's just to protect our fragile minds from a constant onslaught of uncomfortable truths. But we tend to, say that, well, the only reason I'm in this situation is because this happened, or, I'm only here because I lost my job, or this wouldn't have happened if my wife hadn't have done this. And the it's not that you're lying to yourself, I mean, those may be the actual facts of the matter, but you're not going deeper. And with the Ibogaine, that barrier is torn down. You start thinking those thoughts, and you'll hear your own voice booming back to you like, no, you felt inadequate, or you may see the answer written on a wall, like the answers come in many forms, but you have a very introspective experience that only you can provide yourself, because it's unlocking things in your brain that you didn't even know were there. And so the quote unquote psychedelic aspect of it is tantamount to its success. I mean, it's without that shift in your perception and shift in your thought and the way you think, the way you see yourself, the way you view yourself, the way you view the world and your place in it. Um, you know, it it it's a lot. And
It's a big part of the
to
equation.
remove that from the equation, it's not going to do addiction medicine any favors, not, and by removing that part of it, I mean, let's be honest, the end goal is so that they can synthesize it, patent it, and make it become a maintenance medication with a 20-year patent life. And, it's
It's not in the best interest of the patient in the
it
end. It's
no, no,
not.
it's not in the best interest of the patient. It's not in the best interest of the community. It's not in the best interest of the community at large, outside of the Ibogaine community.
So this is
Um, and
ethical
some of the false narratives that are being pushed right now, by, unnamed people, but, putting out, saying, 80 to 90% success rate. No, no, there's no 80 to 90% success rate. If we're counting, if they're still clean 3 days after, maybe, but if we're talking about 6 months down the road, a year down the road, that that is not a realistic
What is it?
estimate.
Do you have an idea of what it is just based on your own
Yeah,
observation?
I mean, I kind of break it into two groups. You got your people that, you know, they want to do Ibogaine. They're searching you out. They've done all this research, and they feel called to it. And with those people, I would say that 80% on the top end of the range, but I mean, probably 65, 70% maybe do well and continue to stay without whatever they're trying to leave behind. Um, the ones who, their families do all the phone calls, like the cases I described a little bit earlier, it maybe 30 to 40% of them actually stay clean.
Yeah. So your own motivation or will to do it is everything.
It really is. It
Yeah.
really is. And if the provider's not taking that into account, you know,
You're not doing them a
that's
favor. But does it mean sometimes that so somebody does come in half-heartedly to do ibogaine, or they're somebody's enabled it, but they do the ibogaine and they may go back to using, but something has already shifted in them because of the ibogaine's the psycho
yes.
spiritual
Yeah.
thing. talked about. So maybe it takes them another couple years, to get clean. Have you seen that
Um,
scenario?
yeah, I mean, for sure, there's been a lot of people that I've treated who went back on and then got clean, whether it was through another Ibogaine treatment or through some other method. But, it was the beginning of their journey. And there are um, a lot of people who they I'll give you a story from my own when I went for my Ibogaine detox. I already mentioned how I had to go back to Chicago because of a court date. I was there for 36 hours, and I knew that I had left dope in my apartment. I knew when I got on that plane I was going to relapse.
Mm.
And when I got there and packed all my stuff, and before I was ready to go to the airport, I did some of that dope, and it was the first time I ever threw up from heroin. I felt awful physically. And then after it wore off, I felt so awful. And, I mean, this sounds horrible, but it wasn't like that I disappointed my family or anything. I mean, I was used to disappointing them. I disappointed all these strangers that just worked so hard to get me clean and sober. And I showed up in rough condition. That, they made a bunch of jokes about me, like I kept calling me Elvis because I tested positive for barbiturates, and like, I was a difficult detox in many ways, and then I went home and I relapsed, but that it was literally like a one-time use. And the way that I felt about myself afterwards, like that was 100% a part of my journey. But
Right.
this is something that when I'm talking with the families on the phones and stuff, I don't share that because it, it I'm hesitant even, talking about it on here, but, I'm already 2 feet into it. But um, you don't want to give the clients, you know, it, you don't want to give them the idea that relapse is part of the experience and give them a hall pass to go ahead and get high one more
Oh,
time
I
when they
see.
go
I
home.
see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So
A lot of sense because, like you said, you sometimes know you're going to do something. I used to smoke, and for a long time, I quit because of psilocybin. And for a long time, I would had this little narrative going on in my head that when I became really old, or if my partner passed away, I was going to start smoking again. And then I realized that I was giving myself this ticket, and it was like in the future, but I was already setting it up for that to happen. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I had to disengage from that narrative and like consciously step outside of it for it to not be in my future, as this temptation that you put up in the future, but it's still a temptation and it's kind of running you in some way, you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was blessed that I had such a horrible experience with it that, like, I mean, I had some oral surgery done not that long ago. A few years ago I had a pinched nerve. And I mean, we have all the morphine and OxyContin in the world in the safe, but I'm scared to death to even take one because I remember what it felt like the last time I did. And like I'm talking, I had my shirt off laying on the cold tile floor, like praying to just let me throw up and just let it be over. And so I have no interest in feeling that way again. It's I wish I would have had that experience the first time I used it, but I also wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't walking down the road that I did. So no regrets.
Is that a token of gratitude what you're saying there? I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't gone through all that. That somehow or the
Yeah,
other was a kind of training for you to do the work you do now.
yeah. I mean, I got into this business in my very early 30s, and I was a lost soul up until then. I mean, going from job to job. Um, I mean, I did have a stable relationship for 7 years, but and I lost that relationship not because I relapsed, but because I wouldn't admit that I relapsed, and I kept trying to talk my way out of it, or and that's what I mean by letting go of those narratives. Um, my ex-fiance is married now, has two kids. Well, she's widowed now, but she has two kids, and but um, we didn't talk for the first couple of years, but once she figured out, what I was doing, and I was down in Mexico and all that, she reached out, and like we we talk frequently. She was my best friend. I was going to spend the rest of my life with her. Like, we never had any fight or argument really. It was just, she was sick of the dishonesty. But, I was able to clear a lot of things up for her, and tell her, what was really going on and what wasn't. And and we've maintained a friendship ever since. And I think that's a healthy thing. But sorry, I forget what even set me off on that tangent. The the relationships at home. We don't get to choose those. We're born with the family we have, and I encourage everybody to try and reconnect with their families, but some people really need to distance themselves from their families. There is that flip side of the coin. I think that's important to mention also.
Sometimes you can
It's
change, but it doesn't mean your family member is going to change. The,
exactly,
right.
exactly.
And so maybe the acceptance, it's really acceptance. You learn to accept that this is how things are, and that's what liberates you to, kind of live your life.
And acceptance is almost the easier part of it. It's actually putting the barriers in place, and respecting and holding those boundaries that is the difficult part with families.
They know how
You
to push
know,
the buttons.
they do, and they know how to pull you back in. And you know, if it's a toxic family, whether it's, addiction, alcoholism, emotional, physical abuse, whatever it is, whether it's, your maternal and paternal families, or whether it's, your own nuclear family that you've created. Um, all of the above, there's situations where it's not healthy, and it needs to, you know, the relationship, it can't, you can't stay on the path that you want to be on if you stay in that relationship, because they're not invested in change like you are. And
Yeah,
we
yeah,
can't
right,
change other people no matter how hard we try.
right. But you can change yourself, and that is the good news, right?
Only
Yeah,
thing we have control over in this life is our reaction.
right.
Can't control what anybody's going to do to me, but I can control how I react to it, and what boundaries I put up, and how I keep that, container. So
And that's a very creative statement, because once you once you understand that you have power over your response in a situation, um, that opens up different options of how you exercise that response. Just once you understand, I can choose not to be triggered by this person, or I can choose to walk away from this relationship, or I can choose to set boundaries for what I will allow this person to treat me like or do to me. It's empowering. It's usually empowering for you.
absolutely.
Sometimes the other person changes because of that, but there's that statement, the prophet is always misunderstood in his own town. Well, if you take that
Mm,
out of the spiritual context, that you're going through a spiritual journey, it's awakening you in different ways. And your family is often the last to recognize that you've changed like that.
Yes. Because they've been the closest to you. They're used to the lies and it's just another lie to them. If you've been in active addiction for a long time, I mean, no matter how much your family loves you, every time you open your mouth, they assume you're lying. It's
That
in
distance hurts.
most situations. So you have to work to get that trust back. That's something that you have to accept. You can't just put the blame on your family for that. You created that dynamic. Your choices, your decisions led to that whole dynamic where you've lost trust with the people that you love and people that love you. And
You have to
you
demonstrate your
can't put the
trust.
onus on them to change that. You have to change it with your actions, not your words. You can tell them, "Oh, I'm different," all you want. Words ring hollow when you've been lying for 10 years, 15 years to somebody. Actions are really the only language they will understand.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you. Um, Here's Apollo saying, "It took 8 years for my sister to trust me and finally believe I was different. With my
Uh,
family, it took a while." Right.
Apollo,
Yeah.
my sister disowned me when she was 13, I was 12, and we didn't reconnect until I was 34, 35. And we call each other, we're on the phone, tell each other we love each other, send each other gifts. You know, she and I'm extremely proud of her. She's a very, very accomplished person. She's a forensic scientist, one of the top forensic scientists in the nation. Um, she, you know, has a advisory gig in DC on drug policy. She's I couldn't be more proud of her.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear your story of how you've renewed your life and restored your relationships. It's really great. That in itself is a success story, you know, for anyone to see that there's this pathway, and it can take you out of a black hole in your life and doing things that are killing you, and to finding purpose and meaning, and you know, being able to live your life. Doesn't mean that all problems are going to go away, or it doesn't mean anything like that. You might have new traumas, but you have different tools to deal with it.
Yeah, you assuredly will have new traumas. It's just, it's the facts of life. Hopefully they won't be severe traumas, but everybody's gonna experience deaths in their life. They're gonna have to grieve. They're gonna have their hearts broken. It's life.
Or
You know.
fail at things you're trying to do. Everybody
Yeah.
goes through that kind of stuff. Yeah, so but the good
Yeah,
news is there are ways out of it.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I know a lot of what I'm saying sounds like I'll pick yourself up by the bootstraps, but that's just the beginning of it. You got to take that initiative and reach out. But there's I'm just a speck in the ocean. There are a lot of people like me that will put their all into helping you get better. They'll help you navigate the family issues. You know, it, you're not going to be alone in the journey, but you definitely have to start that journey on your own. You have to make that decision and put the first foot forward, and whether it's pick up a phone or walk into a meeting or whatever you got to do. Um,
You got to take the first
it's
step, right?
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So I just want to take this moment to say that awake.net is a social network where we're gathering together. I call them mentors and masters from the Ibogaine and greater entheogenic community, and we're creating a community of people who can help you, who bring in different modalities, and we've created a 9 month course called Change Your Character, which is post Ibogaine. Anyone can join it. We haven't launched it yet. It's going to launch soon, but uh, just to say that to address that journey, we've created this 9 month program, which is taught by many different teachers, bringing their own gifts into the mix. So check it out. And if you're an Ibogaine provider or other entheogenic provider who has a lot of experience, consider joining our directory of mentors and masters, because it takes a village to heal. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
well, I think we should close now, unless someone has anything else. It was a great place to end. Thank you so much, Tom. Can you just mention again where you can be found?
Yeah, Anselmo Ibogaine, www.anselmoibogaine.com. That's Anzelmo. Um, it's a Sicilian surname. And again, back to my grandfather, he never had children of his own. That was part of why I chose this name as the name of the clinic, to give him a legacy. He didn't have anybody to carry on the Anselmo name. He didn't have any sons or daughters. My mom's father, she was 8 years old when he went to prison. He stabbed someone in a bar, and I never met the guy. He's dead now, but my real grandfather was Tony Anselmo. But yeah, AnselmoIbogaine.com. All the social media handles are Anselmo_Ibogaine, and hit me on my phone. We have the 800 numbers, have the WhatsApp call tabs on all the social medias. Yeah,
Sounds good.
reach out by email, however you want.
All righty. Thank you very much.
No problem. It was a pleasure. I'm glad I could help fill the void today. So hope everyone got something from it, and thank y'all for your time, and until the next one.
Yeah, thank you.